He sat down slowly, the way people do when their legs stop cooperating before their mind catches up. Not a dramatic collapse, just a man lowering himself into his own office chair like the floor had shifted under him. The orthodontist. The same one who had canceled my daughter's treatment 4 days earlier based on a single phone call from a man who has never once taken her to a dentist appointment in her life. I had laid the records on his desk, 3 years of documented cleanings, checkups, and a letter from her pediatric dentist calling her oral hygiene, and I am quoting here, exceptional for her age group. Then I asked him to examine her teeth right there in the chair. And when he did, he had to sit down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. Before I go back to where this started, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if you want stories early and uncut, channel members are already ahead of you. They heard this one before it went public, and they're already on the next story. The join button is right next to subscribe, below the video. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because none of what happened in that office makes sense without it. The orthodontist's office was on the 2nd floor of a medical building that always smelled faintly of new carpet and hand sanitizer. I had been in that waiting room more times than I could count, every 6 weeks for a year and a half, sitting in the same chair by the window, watching my daughter walk back out with her progress photos and her little bag of replacement elastics. That afternoon, I came alone. My daughter was at school. I had taken 2 hours off work, driven across town, and walked in carrying a manila folder thick enough to matter. I was calm. I want to be clear about that. Not the performative calm of someone suppressing a scream, actual calm, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you have and exactly what it proves. I had been building that folder for 4 days. To understand why my brother thought he could make that call, and why the office believed him, you need to know what came before it. My name is Renata Ose. I am 38 years old, and I have one daughter, Priya, who just turned 11 in January. Her father and I separated when she was 3 and divorced when she was 5. We share custody, and by most measures we co-parent well. He lives 40 minutes away, he attends her school events, and he has never once interfered in her medical care. That part of my life, despite how it started, settled into something functional and respectful. My brother Damien is 34. He is my biological brother, same parents, same childhood home, same last name before I married and changed it. I say that because it matters to understand that his access to my life was not accidental. He knew my address, my daughter's school schedule, the name of her orthodontist, because I had mentioned it at a family dinner. I had no reason, at the time, to treat that information like something that needed to be protected. Damien has never had children. He has opinions about them in the way people who have never raised a child tend to have opinions about raising children, with great confidence and very little friction. He decided somewhere along the way, I would say it started around the time Priya was 6 or 7, that I was too soft. That I was raising her wrong. That I let her get away with too much and gave her too many things she hadn't earned. The braces were, to him, the most recent proof of this theory. The baseline dynamic between Damien and me was simple. He talked, I listened, and I had been doing that since we were children. He was the older sibling in temperament, even though I am the older sibling in fact. He spoke in a tone that assumed conclusion before argument. Our mother enabled it by laughing at his observations and calling him perceptive. I had spent 30-plus years absorbing corrections I had not asked for, and somewhere in early adulthood, I made a quiet internal decision to stop arguing and start documenting. That habit, the documentation habit, is why I won. The first incident that matters happened 14 months before the orthodontist situation. Damien came to Priya's 10th birthday party at my apartment, which I should not have allowed but did because my mother asked me to, and within 20 minutes of arriving he had cornered me in my kitchen to tell me that buying Priya a new tablet was, as he put it, exactly the kind of thing that would produce a child who expects the world handed to her. I didn't respond. I put the juice glasses on the tray and carried them out to the table. What I did not tell him was that Priya had saved 8 months of allowance toward that tablet, covered 60% of the cost herself, and I had matched the rest as a lesson in goal setting. He had watched her open it without knowing any of that. I filed the moment away. The second incident was at my mother's house, 8 months before the orthodontist situation. Damien had seen Priya's orthodontic retainer case on the counter. She had taken it out to eat, and made a comment at the table that I had, quote, spoiled that child rotten, and now she's got designer teeth while he's still paying off student loans. His wife, Felicia, laughed uncomfortably and looked at her plate. My mother said nothing. I said nothing. I looked at my daughter and watched her go very still, the way children do when adults say something about them that the adults think is about money, but is actually about worth. I excused myself to refill the water pitcher. In the kitchen, I stood at the sink for a moment and thought, I have 11 months left on this treatment plan. I am paying every cent of it on time, and I have every receipt. The third incident happened 6 weeks before he made the call. We were on the phone, a routine check-in that my mother orchestrates monthly because she believes in the family staying connected, which in practice means Damien and I talk for 20 minutes while she listens from her own phone, and he said, completely unprompted, that he had been thinking, and he wasn't sure braces were even medically necessary for Priya, that plenty of kids grew up with crooked teeth and turned out fine, and that in his opinion I was trying to make her perfect instead of raising her to be resilient. I made a sound that was adjacent to agreement. I was already pulling up the orthodontist's patient portal on my laptop to screenshot the treatment progress notes. 3 weeks after that phone call, my mother mentioned to Damien, in conversation, casually, that Priya was almost done with her treatment. 6 weeks until the final phase. He made the call the next day. What he told the orthodontist's office, I later confirmed through the office manager, was detailed and deliberate. He said he was the child's uncle and that he was calling out of concern. He said my daughter never brushed her teeth properly, that I was aware of this and had done nothing, and that continuing her treatment was enabling bad hygiene habits that would ruin the orthodontic work. He used the phrase "doesn't deserve braces," which the office manager wrote down because she found it unusual enough to note. He also implied, without stating outright, that there might be a liability issue for the practice if they continued treating a patient with documented neglect. The office called me that evening. They canceled the treatment effective immediately. $8,900 paid. 18 months of work. 6 weeks from completion. I did not yell on the phone. The woman on the other end sounded uncomfortable, which told me she already had doubts. I asked her one question. Had anyone at the practice examined my daughter's teeth before making this decision? There was a pause long enough to mean no. I told her I would come in Thursday with documentation. That Thursday was 2 days away. I spent both of them building a folder that would leave no room for interpretation. I called Priya's pediatric dentist, Dr. Yolanda Ferreira, who had been seeing her since she was 4 years old. I explained the situation in 60 seconds. Dr. Ferreira's response was immediate and unequivocal. She pulled every record she had, wrote a letter on practice letterhead, and faxed it before end of business that same day. The letter contained specific clinical language about plaque index scores, gum health at every visit for 7 years, and a direct statement that Priya Ose demonstrated oral hygiene practices that placed her in the top tier of pediatric patients in her practice. I printed it. I put it in the folder. I drove to the office on Thursday. And I didn't know it yet, but the office manager had spent the 2 days between my call and that appointment trying to find one clinical note, from any of the 18 months of treatment, that supported what my brother had told them. She hadn't found it. Because there wasn't one. She hadn't found it. Because there wasn't one. What I had built over the previous 4 days was not complicated. It was thorough. There is a difference. A complicated strategy has moving parts that can break. What I had was a folder, a letter, a 7-year dental record, and a woman who had treated my daughter since her first loose tooth and was, by Thursday morning, furious on our behalf. I kept it private for one reason. I did not want Damien to know I was coming. People who believe they have already won do not prepare for the version of events where they are wrong. If he heard I was going to the office with documentation, he would call again. He would add detail. He would layer the story further, and then the orthodontist would be navigating 2 competing narratives instead of a clean record versus an anonymous allegation. So I told no one. Not my mother, not my co-parent, not my closest friend Adiz, who would have shown up at that office with me and made the whole thing considerably louder than it needed to be. The only person outside my immediate circle who knew the full picture was my attorney, Miriam Tanaka. I had retained Miriam 11 months earlier for a completely unrelated matter, a contract dispute with a former employer that had since resolved, and when the orthodontist situation happened, I called her within 30 minutes of hanging up with the office. She was brief and precise in the way I had come to rely on. Her voice was steady over the phone. Document every contact point. Get the letter from the pediatric dentist. Find out if the cancellation was communicated in writing and in what language. And Renata, don't threaten anything yet. Just show up with evidence. I had written that last sentence on a notepad and stuck it to my laptop screen for the next 2 days. The close call came the evening before my appointment, at a time I was not expecting it. My mother called at 7:40 in the evening. I was at my kitchen table sorting the folder into order. Dental records first, Dr. Ferreira's letter second, the patient portal screenshots of every progress note from the 18 months of treatment third. I answered because not answering would have prompted a follow-up call within the hour. I talked to Damien today, she said. No preamble. She never used preamble when she was delivering information. She wanted to present as neutral. Her voice had the particular cadence she used when she was testing whether I already knew something. He mentioned he called Priya's orthodontist. He said he was worried. She paused. He thought you should know he was thinking of you. The folder was under my left hand. I turned it face down on the table. I appreciate that he worries, I said. He loves that girl. A beat. He just thinks sometimes you take on too much. The braces, the tablet, all of it. He wants Priya to understand that things have to be earned. I looked at the stack of receipts, $8,900 in installment payments, every one of them paid on the date it was due, going back 18 months. I looked at Dr. Ferreira's letter, which used the phrase exceptional for her age group. I looked at the photograph Priya's orthodontist had taken at her 12-month check, her smile fully lit, the brackets doing exactly what they had been doing for a year and a half. I hear you, I said. My mother's tone softened slightly, the way it did when she thought she had landed something. Maybe this is a good time to step back and think about what she actually needs. I moved the folder off the table and set it on the chair beside me. I'm actually in the middle of something right now. Can I call you tomorrow? After we hung up, I sat for a moment. Then I opened my laptop, drafted an email to Miriam summarizing the phone call, and attached a copy of the office cancellation notice I had received the previous evening. I hit send at 8:14. Miriam responded at 8:52 with 3 words, noted. See you Thursday. The second close call happened the following morning, in the parking lot of the medical building, 40 minutes before my appointment. I was sitting in my car going through the folder one final time when my phone rang. It was Damien. Not a text, a call, which meant he wanted to hear my voice. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered. Hey. His tone was casual in a specific way, the casual of someone who had rehearsed the casual. Mom said she talked to you last night. She did. He pulled his phone away from his ear for a moment. I could hear the shift in ambient sound, then brought it back. I just want to make sure you're not upset. I called that office because I genuinely care about Priya. I was looking at the entrance to the building, the lobby doors, the elevator I was about to take. I know you do, I said. The hygiene thing, he stopped. I've seen her, Renata. She eats and doesn't brush. I've watched it. I thought about Dr. Ferreira's letter. I thought about the phrase plaque index scores within normal range at every recorded visit. I thought about the fact that my daughter, who was currently at school doing a science project on freshwater ecosystems, had a dental record so clean it had been used as a comparison point for other patients in that practice. I'm not upset, I said. Good. He exhaled, genuine relief. He believed me. He had no reason not to. Let me know if you need anything. I'm around. I will, I said. Thanks for calling. He hung up. I put my phone in my bag, picked up the folder, got out of the car, and walked into the building. In the elevator, I thought about the word around. He was around. Present. Available. Ready to help on his own terms, by his own definition of what helping looked like, without ever once asking what I actually needed. I had 3 weeks left before the final phase of Priya's treatment was scheduled to begin. The orthodontist had canceled everything in a single phone call, but the machine that canceled it was one that could be reversed if the right information was placed in front of the right person. Miriam had confirmed this. The cancellation was administrative, not clinical. No one had examined my daughter's teeth. The note in her file simply said, "Treatment suspended pending hygiene concern, parent contact made." One line. Based on nothing. I stepped off the elevator on the second floor and walked into the waiting room. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman I recognized from every appointment for a year and a half, looked up and recognized me. Something moved across her face. Not unfriendliness. More like the expression of someone who had been briefed and wasn't sure how the briefing was going to hold up. Mrs. Osei. She had always called me that, though I had corrected her twice. Dr. Haddad will be with you shortly. I sat in the chair by the window, the same one I always sat in, and I set the folder on my lap and I waited. Dr. Haddad came out 8 minutes later. He was a trim man in his mid-50s, careful in his movements, the kind of clinician who had built a reputation over decades and wore it with the specific anxiety of someone who knew how quickly it could be damaged. He gestured toward the consultation room, and I followed him in. He sat across the small table from me. I sat across from him. There was a single framed print on the wall, a diagram of tooth structure, rendered in pale blue. I had looked at it at every consultation for 18 months. He opened a folder of his own, Priya's file. He folded his hands over it. Mrs. Osei. His voice was measured and professionally regretful, which I had expected. I want to start by saying that this was not a decision we made lightly. I opened my folder and set Dr. Ferreira's letter on the table between us. He stopped. "I'd like you to read that first," I said. "And then I have a request." He read the letter. I watched his eyes move across it. I watched him reach the phrase plaque index scores within normal range at every recorded visit across 7 years of continuous care. I watched him reach the phrase exceptional for her age group. He set it down. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. "I understand this is from your pediatric dentist." "It is. I also have her records from every visit in the last 7 years." I laid them on the table, the stack organized by date. "And I have her progress notes from this practice, every visit, 18 months, the complete file. I accessed them through the patient portal this week." He looked at the records. "My request," I said, and I kept my voice exactly level, "is that you examine her teeth. Today, right now, in this office. She's at school, but she can be here by 4. I'd like you to look at them and tell me clinically, with your own hands, whether there is any evidence to support what you were told." The room was very quiet. The air conditioning made a low, steady sound. Dr. Haddad looked at the letter. He looked at the records. He looked at the progress notes from his own practice, 18 months of checkups that contained not a single flag, not a single hygiene notation, not a single instruction to the patient to improve her brushing. His chair moved back from the table. Slowly. Like a man whose legs had made a decision before his mind caught up. He sat. Not dramatically. Not as a performance. He simply sat, and for a moment he looked like someone doing arithmetic they didn't want to finish. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was different now, quieter, without the measured, professional layer. "I should have called you first. You should have examined her first," I said. "Before any decision was made." He nodded. "Once." I let the silence stay where it was. Then I picked up my phone. Not to check a message, there was nothing to check. I picked it up because I needed to anchor myself to what came next, to the specific sequence of steps I had already decided I was going to take before I ever walked into this building. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Miriam's name. I sent a single message. He sat down. "Come Tuesday." The response came 40 seconds later. 3 words again. Already on it. I drove home in the same car I had driven there, my 12-year-old sedan with the cracked side mirror I kept meaning to replace and never did, and I did not feel the rush of satisfaction I had expected. What I felt was more like the quiet after something structural gives way. A beam settling. The sound of a wall deciding it doesn't need to hold anymore. Priya was home by 3:15. She dropped her backpack by the front door the way she always did, and she went directly to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it. "How was school?" I asked. She set the glass down. "We finished the freshwater thing. Ms. Bonilla said mine was the best presentation of the day." "Did she?" She said it because it was true. Not bragging, just accounting for the facts. She had always been like that. I made dinner. She did her homework at the kitchen table. I watched her move through the evening routine she had kept, without variation, for years: homework, dinner, dishes rinsed and stacked, bathroom, teeth brushed for exactly 2 minutes, because she had timed it once and decided that was the right amount, lights off by 9. After she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone. I called Miriam. Not a text this time. "He's going to reinstate," I said, before she could speak. "He knows he made a clinical error." "That's not enough," Miriam said. Her tone was not unkind, it was precise, the way a scalpel is precise. "He made an administrative decision that canceled a minor patient's active medical treatment based on an anonymous third-party allegation with no clinical basis. That is a formal complaint to the state dental board. That is a demand for reimbursement of any cancellation penalties. And your brother," she paused. "Renata, what he did has a name." I already knew the name. I had looked it up the night after the cancellation call, sitting in the same chair I was sitting in now. Interfering with a minor's medical treatment through deliberate false representation. In this state, depending on how it was filed, it could rise to criminal harassment. It could certainly constitute tortious interference. "I know," I said. "You've been patient," Miriam said. "For a long time. But he made this decision in your daughter's name. He used her as the object of a lie he told to a professional office for what purpose? What did he actually gain?" I thought about that. I thought about Damien saying she doesn't deserve braces. Not that I couldn't afford them. Not that I was making a financial mistake. That she didn't deserve them. "Control," I said. He needed to be right about her. Miriam was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to draft 2 letters Tuesday morning. One to the dental board. One to your brother through his home address." I looked at the folder on the table. The receipts. The letter from Dr. Ferreira. The progress notes from 18 months of treatment that showed a child who had done everything right. "Draft them," I said. Damien called that evening at 9:53. Then again at 10:17. Both times, I watched the screen until it stopped lighting up, and then I set the phone back down on the table. Everything I needed to say, I would say once, in front of everyone. Miriam sent both letters Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Haddad's office had called to confirm reinstatement of Priya's treatment with a written apology on practice letterhead. By Thursday, Miriam had received a response from Damien's address, not from Damien, but from a woman named Felicia, his wife, who said she was responding on his behalf and that the family hoped this could be resolved privately. Miriam forwarded it to me with one line of annotation: "They know." The confrontation did not happen in a courtroom. It did not happen in Miriam's office or over a phone call or in a letter. It happened at my mother's house on a Sunday afternoon in February, 3 weeks after the letters went out, at a family lunch my mother had organized before any of this had fully landed, before she understood the weight of what Damien had done, or before she had allowed herself to understand it. By the time she did understand, the lunch was already scheduled, the food was already bought, and my mother believed, as she had always believed, that proximity was the same as resolution. I arrived at 12:40 in the afternoon. My daughter was not with me. She was at her father's that weekend, a fact I had arranged deliberately, 2 weeks earlier, when I first understood that this conversation was going to happen and that it was not going to be quiet. Priya did not need to watch this. She was 11 years old, and she was doing a freshwater ecosystems project, and she had already been through enough. My mother's house was a 3-bedroom bungalow in a neighborhood that had not changed much in 30 years. The front yard had the same rosebushes it had always had. The driveway held my mother's car, Damien's car, a gray sedan I recognized, and a second car belonging to Damien's wife Felicia. A third car, parked at the curb, belonged to my cousin Abina Ose-Mensah, my father's niece, who had been brought into my mother's orbit after my father passed and who had, over the years, become the kind of person who attended every family gathering and said very little and watched everything. I had called Abina the previous Monday. She had listened to the full story without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Tell me what you need me to do." Not, "This is terrible." Not, "I can't believe him." Just the question, which was the only thing I had needed to hear. "Be there," I said. That's all. Inside, the table was set. My mother had made rice and stew, the same thing she made for every family gathering, the smell of it exactly the same as every Sunday of my childhood. She was moving between the kitchen and the dining room when I came in, and she greeted me with the particular warmth of someone who was hoping the warmth would be sufficient. "Renata." She held my face in both hands the way she had always done. "I'm glad you came." Damien was in the living room with Felicia. He was standing near the window with a glass of water. When I walked in, he looked up and something moved across his face, a micro-expression, gone in a fraction of a second. Then he pulled his phone out of his pocket, put it back, pulled it out again. "Hey." His voice was easy. Practiced. Felicia looked at her plate, though we weren't yet at the table. She had sent the letter to Miriam. She knew more than he thought she had shared. Abina was already seated at the dining table, her hands folded in front of her, her posture straight. She did not look at me when I came in. She looked at the center of the table. But when I sat down across from her, I saw the slight shift. She straightened by a fraction of an inch. She was ready. My mother brought the food out. We sat. For 20 minutes, nothing happened except the ordinary mechanics of a family lunch. Serving spoons and napkins, and my mother asking about Priya's school project, and Damien telling a story about a coworker that I did not follow, and Felicia refilling her water glass twice. I ate. I listened. I kept my folder in my bag, which was on the floor beside my chair. I waited until my mother had sat back down after clearing the first round of dishes. I waited until everyone had settled. I waited until Damien said, unprompted, leaning back in his chair with the particular ease of a man who believed he had already survived the worst of it. "I hope Priya's not too upset about the braces thing." I said what I thought someone needed to say. The table went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of shock, the quiet of people who had been waiting for this and were now watching to see who would move first. I reached into my bag and set the folder on the table. "Let me show you something," I said. Damien's eyes went to the folder. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "Renata." I opened the folder and turned Dr. Ferreira's letter to face him across the table. "This is a letter from Priya's pediatric dentist, Dr. Yolanda Ferreira. She has been treating my daughter since she was 4 years old." I let him look at it. Read the highlighted section. He didn't reach for it. He looked at it from where he sat. A pause. 2 seconds too long. "I've seen that kid eat and not brush," he said. His voice was still level, still carrying the register of a man who believed his own conviction. "I've seen it with my own eyes." My mother, at the head of the table, looked between us. She set her serving spoon down slowly. "This letter," I said, "documents her plaque index scores at every single dental visit for 7 years. Every visit. The letter specifically states that her scores placed her in the top tier of pediatric patients in that practice." I paused. "Not average. Top tier." Felicia looked at her husband. One quick glance, then away. Damien's jaw shifted. "One dentist's opinion. It's not an opinion. It's a clinical measurement." I turned the next page. "These are the progress notes from the orthodontist's own practice. 18 months of appointments. I would like you to point to any note, any single notation, that flags a hygiene concern." I slid them across the table toward him. He did not touch them. From across the table, Abina watched. She did not move. She did not speak. She straightened by another fraction and set her hands flat in front of her. My mother said, quietly, "Damien." The color started leaving his face. Not dramatically, it was a gradual withdrawal, the way warmth leaves a room when a window opens. He looked at the progress notes he had not touched, and then he looked at me, and something that had been solid in his expression began to lose its structure. "I was trying to help," he said. His voice was different now, a fraction higher, a fraction tighter. "You called a medical office," I said. "You identified yourself as her uncle. You told them she never brushes her teeth and doesn't deserve braces. You used the word deserve." I kept my voice exactly level. "And the office canceled her treatment. $8,900 paid. 18 months of work. 6 weeks from completion." Felicia put her hand flat on the table. Nobody spoke. For 3 full seconds, nothing. Then my mother said, "He said what?" "Not to me. To him." Damien turned to her. "Mom, it's not." Her voice dropped to something careful. "You told them she doesn't deserve it?" "I said it wrong." He pulled his phone out of his pocket, put it back. "I was trying to, Mom. She's been given everything without. She is 11 years old." My mother's voice did not rise. "It did not need to. She is your niece." Felicia looked at the wall. I reached into the folder and removed the second document. "This," I said, "is the formal complaint filed with the State Dental Board on behalf of my daughter and myself." I set it on the table. "It documents the administrative cancellation of an active pediatric orthodontic treatment based on an unverified third-party allegation with no clinical basis." It names the caller. His breath changed. I heard it from across the table. Abina's eyes moved to him. She did not look away. "The dental board has already acknowledged receipt," I continued. "Dr. Haddad's practice has reinstated Priya's treatment and issued a written apology. They have also begun an internal review of the call intake protocol that allowed an anonymous third party to trigger a clinical cancellation without examination." I paused. "That review references this complaint." Damien put his hand flat on the table. "You filed," he stopped. "Renata, this is family. You filed a complaint against me with the regulatory body that governs the practice that canceled my daughter's medical treatment." I kept my eyes on him. "Yes." She laughed once, not Felicia, not my mother. "Damien." A sound with no warmth in it, reflexive, the laugh of someone trying to reframe what was happening. "This is insane. You're treating this like I committed a crime." I looked at him steadily. "There's one more document. If you've watched this entire confrontation and you're not subscribed, subscribe now. Because what comes next is the part that made Miriam put her pen down when I told her. You're going to want to be here for it." I took the last document from the folder and I set it on the table. It was a 1-page letter on Miriam's letterhead, Tanaka Family Law and Civil Litigation, addressed to Damien by full name and home address. I had read it so many times in the previous week that I could have recited it without looking. But I did not recite it. I turned it to face him, and I let him read it himself. He picked it up. His hands were not steady. The letter was precise in the way that Miriam was always precise. It named the date of the call to the orthodontist's office. It named the specific representations he had made, that the child never brushes her teeth, that she doesn't deserve braces, the implication of parental neglect and potential liability. It noted that these representations were made knowingly, given that he had no clinical basis for them and had not sought one. It named the outcome, cancellation of active pediatric medical treatment, $8,900 in paid costs at risk, 18 months of orthodontic progress jeopardized. And then it named the legal exposure. Tortious interference with a contractual relationship. Defamation. And one more, depending on jurisdiction and prosecutorial discretion, deliberate interference with a minor's access to medical treatment, which, in this state, carried a civil penalty range of $10,000 to $50,000 per incident and, in aggravated cases, a misdemeanor charge. He set the letter down. He couldn't speak. I watched his face in sequence. The jaw that had been set for 20 minutes went slack. The careful ease that had carried him through the first part of this lunch dissolved, and underneath it was something I had not seen on my brother's face in a long time. The expression of a person who has been certain about something and has just discovered the certainty was built on nothing. His wife made a sound. Not a word. Something smaller. She blinked 3 times fast and then pressed her lips together and looked at the center of the table. Abina, across from me, drew a slow breath through her nose. She set her hands folded in front of her again, and she looked at me, and she nodded once, not a dramatic nod, just an acknowledgement, the physical equivalent of a period at the end of a sentence. My mother said nothing. She sat at the head of the table with her hands in her lap, and she looked at her son, and the look on her face was not anger. It was something heavier than anger. The expression of a woman confronting, in real time, the gap between the child she thought she had raised and the man sitting in front of her. The room was completely still. Damien opened his mouth twice without producing a word. Felicia said, very quietly, Damien. Not a defense. Not a deflection. Just his name, in the tone people use when they mean, stop. He folded. Not dramatically. Quietly, like something essential had stopped working. He sat back in his chair and looked at the letter and looked at me, and the posture that had held him upright through every dinner, every phone call, every correction he had delivered to my life for 11 years, it was just gone. I didn't think it would, he stopped. Swallowed. I didn't think they'd actually cancel. Her voice didn't rise. From the head of the table, my mother said, that is not an answer. The air conditioning ran. A car passed outside. The rosebushes were still in the yard. My hands had stopped shaking. I realized only in that moment that they had been shaking, slightly, since I sat down. I let out a long breath and I looked at the letter on the table, and then I looked at my brother. I'm not asking you to understand why what you did was wrong, I said. You're going to understand that whether you want to or not. What I'm telling you today is what's going to happen next. I tapped the corner of Miriam's letter. The dental board complaint moves forward regardless. That's already in motion. Whether the civil claim moves forward depends on whether restitution is made, in full, in writing within 30 days, for any costs incurred as a result of the cancellation, including Miriam's fees for the reinstatement work. Felicia reached across the table and touched the letter. She read it herself, quickly, with the focused attention of someone already calculating. We'll need to talk to someone, she said. Not to me, to her husband. Her voice was quiet and entirely without warmth. She had written that letter to Miriam asking to resolve this privately. She had known, on some level, what her husband had done. And she had spent the 3 weeks since then watching him maintain the posture of a man who had done something reasonable. She looked at him now, and her hand moved to her water glass, which she picked up and held without drinking from. She did that when she was backed into a corner. I looked at my mother. I want you to know that none of this changes how I feel about you. I'm here because you're my mother and I love you. But I am also not going to let what he did pass without consequence. Not because of the money. Because he did it in my daughter's name. He used her as the vehicle for a lie, and she is 11 years old, and she did nothing wrong. My mother looked at the folder. She looked at the letter. She looked at her son. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She pressed her lips together. She reached across the corner of the table and put her hand over mine, and she didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. Damien and Felicia left 40 minutes later. They did not stay for dessert. Felicia carried out both their coats. At the door, Damien turned once. I thought he was going to say something, and I watched him decide not to, and I watched him pull his phone out and put it back as he stepped outside. The door closed. Abina helped my mother clear the table. I sat for a moment in the quiet of the dining room and looked at the rosebushes through the window. The restitution was paid within 22 days. Miriam received a certified check for $6,200, Miriam's fees, the documentation costs, and a portion of the treatment costs the cancellation had put at risk. The dental board complaint proceeded to a formal review regardless, because Miriam and I agreed that the protocol failure at the office needed to be addressed independently of my brother's behavior. Dr. Haddad's practice subsequently updated their intake procedures to require direct contact verification with the custodial parent before any treatment decision could be made based on third-party information. That update, as far as I know, is still in place. The dental board review concluded 4 months later. No punitive finding against my brother personally. The board's authority was over the practice, not the caller. But the formal record of the complaint exists. It is documented. It has his name on it. Damien did not attend our mother's birthday dinner in April. He did not attend the one in October either. I do not know the full shape of what happened between him and my mother in the months after that Sunday lunch. She does not volunteer it, and I do not ask. What I know is that she calls me every Sunday now, in the evening, and we talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and she asks about Priya first, every time, before anything else. Felicia, I learned through Abina, went back to work full-time the following spring. Whether that was related to the restitution payment or to something else in their household, I genuinely do not know. The amount they paid, $6,200, was not nothing to them. I know that without pleasure. Priya finished her treatment on schedule. The final appointment was on a Thursday morning in March. She walked out of that office with her retainer case and her discharge paperwork and the progress photos from every stage, and she stood in the parking lot in the thin winter sun and ran her tongue over her teeth the way she had been doing since the brackets came off, testing the smoothness of them. They feel weird, she said. Good weird or bad weird? She considered it. Like mine, she said. Like they're finally just mine. She went back to school. I drove to work. On my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking garage, and I thought about that word, deserve, and I thought about my brother saying it into a phone to a stranger about a child who had spent 18 months doing everything right. And I thought about the fact that the word had not landed where he intended it to. It had bounced. It had come back. And it had landed, in the end, on him. I don't hate Damien. I want to be honest about that because the easy version of this story would have me hating him, and the easy version would be wrong. I understand, in a way I could not have articulated before that Sunday lunch, that what he did came from a need so specific and so long-standing that he probably could not name it himself. The need for her to not deserve something. For there to be a limit somewhere. A ceiling I had gotten too close to. I understand it. I just don't carry it anymore. My daughter asked me once, about 2 months after everything was resolved, whether Uncle Damien was coming to her school concert. I said no. She said okay and turned back to her music stand and found her place in the sheet music and started playing again. The sound of it filled the living room, a little uneven in the middle section, where she was still working on the fingering, but clear and present and entirely her own. That was enough for me. So, did I go too far or not far enough? I want to know what you think. Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There's more where this came from. If you want them early and uncut, before anyone else hears them, the join button is right next to subscribe below this video. My members are already on the next one. I'll see you there.